late start due to technical issues. But our first order of business will be to roll call and establish quorum. Honorable Pam Duncan, can you call the roll?
Yes, thank you. And a reminder before I do that all members need to have their cameras on, particularly the voting members. I will begin with the advisory members. Dr. Fernando Figueroa.
Here.
Dr. Ty Handy.
Here, I'm trying to turn my camera on. There we go.
Dr. Jennifer Linden.
Present.
Dr. Anton Reese.
Here.
Dr. Chris Williams.
Here.
All advisory members are present. I will now call roll on the voting members. Dr. Wendy Fletcher.
Present.
Ms. Regent Russell Cox. Regent Green has said she cannot attend. Regent Witten.
Present.
And has Acting Chair James Lee Stevens been able to log on?
I believe he is trying, but he has not joined yet.
Okay, he is ex officio and does not have a vote. We have a quorum with 2 members who are able to vote.
Okay, let's proceed. The next order of business is to approve the draft minutes of our last ROC committee meeting. Honorable Pam Duncan, how would we proceed with no second available on that?
Well, we can just say as consensus, do either the members present have any changes? And if not, we will approve them by consensus.
I do not have any edits or updates.
Neither do I.
Regent Witten? Okay. All right, they are approved as written.
Thank you very much. So our next order of business is to receive updates on the recommendations that came out of our previous board meeting. And at this time, I'm going to ask Chancellor Williams if she will give us the dual credit on underrepresented minorities summary.
Thank you. I appreciate very much the opportunity to provide an update. That URM summary was done by ORPA, and I would ask Alicia Crouch to present the first data piece, and then I can speak to the practices.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Speaking as to the URM students in dual credit, so we have had a fewer students of color enrolled in dual credit than our typical student body. So as of fall 2022, URM students did represent 17.5% of all undergraduate students, while the enrollment of URM students is at 13.5%. So if you scroll down a little bit, you can see that while there is a lag in that population, we have seen a big increase over the last several years in the percentage of dual credit students who are URM. So you can see that there is a, while there was an 82.8% increase in all dual credit students at KCTCS, the URM dual credit students did increase by 115% during that time period.
So I did have one question, Chancellor Williams, about this particular piece of the report. In the CPM, I'm sorry, the CPE report, there is data on this, correct?
Yes, there's data on the success of these students.
Okay, and does it also have more recent data for 21 and 22?
I don't believe CPE has validated that data yet, but Alicia, will you correct me if I'm wrong?
So CPE does not have the, so CPE has the 21-22 data right now, but the success data for 21-22 won't happen until the spring grades are entered, and that is not until the end of this month. So we will have a little bit more information on that in September.
Okay, can we bring that data then to the next board meeting?
Yes.
Be happy to do that.
Okay.
Alicia, is there anything else you want to point out in this report?
I think I'm good with that, Dr. Williams.
Thank you. So I wanted to speak to the two system-wide dual credit initiatives, and then perhaps, Chair, you could ask the presidents to contribute, from some of their experience. But we do have a dual credit task force that's made up of individuals, including principals, guidance counselors, and teachers, along with Kentucky Department of Education staff that work with college chief academic officers, dual credit advisors and coordinators, and system office staff that we call the Kentucky Dual Credit Task Force. And it meets a couple times a year or more often if needed to really look at dual credit issues right at the point of working with the student. How are we managing the financial aid scholarships? How are we enrolling our students? How are our memorandum of agreements working, for example? And in the spring of 2021, that group was charged by David Horseman, who was Associate Commissioner of the Office for Career and Technical Education and of the department at that time, and me, based on the results from the CPE studies, to really look at how do we increase our underrepresented minority population. We know that it makes a huge difference to that population to be successful in a dual credit course in terms of their success later on at a college or university. And so the Dual Credit Task Force researched that process and found this playbook, the Dual Enrollment Playbook, a guide to equitable acceleration for students, and has shared it with all the high schools and colleges. That task force has no true authority, but they do continue to work with the various partners to really think about how to promote those proven practices. And so their goal was to identify 3 to 5 strategies over this year that the schools would work on, and the goal before, but some of that has been really hampered due to COVID and the responses that the schools have had to take. And then separately, we serve as the lead on a year-long technical assistance grant from the College and High School Alliance and are working through their roadmap to work on a work plan to improve areas of weakness in equity goal and public reporting, program integrity and credit transfer, finance, et cetera. And that is a partnership with the Council on Post-Secondary Education with the goal of having a statewide dual credit attainment goal and an updated dual credit policy by the end of this year. And we hope that that will help increase enrollment for URM students in dual credit coursework. Certainly, KDE and KIA are also part of that steering committee. So those are 2 of the system level initiatives.
I do appreciate those efforts, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what I'm seeing in the data. So 13.5, is that what Alicia said? Does that represent this year's numbers on the URM?
Alicia?
It's a little bit back and forth in this report. So I really was wanting us to focus very much on KCTCS, and this seems to kind of mix some data from KCTCS along with, like the overall post-secondary institution numbers. And I'm figuring, this information from CPE is, all students statewide and then all students KCTCS. So as you look at our 6-year change, if I'm reading that correctly, all students were down 12.3% and URM we're up 6.1%. Is that correct?
Yes, that is for all students. So that's the total post-secondary undergraduate population. And then the table 2 below that has that dual credit percentage. Okay. So it is actually, so if we scroll down a little, so it's the 14.2% URM at KCTCS in that 2021 academic year.
So the 13.5, is that the 21-22 numbers?
So the 13.5 is actually the percent of URM enrolled in dual credit statewide. So that includes the 4-year partners.
Okay, so that's what I was trying to be clear about. Okay,
And that's 2021, not 22.
right. Right. So how are we looking? Do we have any idea for fall 2022 at this point, or is it still a little too early to tell?
Yeah, it's too early. Some of the high schools are still standing up their classes, so our numbers are not going to be where they end up, because it takes them a while once the semester starts, some of them to get rolling.
Right,
So
and then
that's-
census date isn't even until October.
Exactly.
Okay.
Census date, yeah, the census date will be November 1st.
But I would also point out that Hazard in particular has been really negatively impacted in dual credit from the flooding, the same with some of our other Eastern Kentucky communities. And Dr. Linda might be able to speak to that.
Yes, thank you for adding that. Yes, definitely. Some of our high schools haven't even opened up yet and won't be able to open. I think Knott County's date is September 19th, and we're hopeful for that. So I think I've mentioned to Dr. Sarapata, I said our enrollment's going to look worse before it gets better, because normally we're entering a lot of dual credit students right now. We'll get them. I don't think we'll get near to what we're used to, but we'll get them. But it's just going to come in at the 11th hour. It's going to come in late.
Thank you so much for that. So as far as if any of the presidents would like to speak to the initiatives you've taken within your own colleges, we're happy to entertain that information.
Yeah, this is tough. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ty.
Go ahead, sir. I'm glad to let you go.
I'll set the bar low for you.
There you go.
So let me speak to certainly a couple of initiatives on our end, and then also in a broader sense, part of the challenge, certainly that I've experienced firsthand with the RMs with dual credit, really overall. So on our end, we actually have a course called Gen 100, and it's an opportunity for us to, cut through some of the bureaucracy and the gatekeepers, if you will, which I noted that the chancellor had as part of that narrative. Gen 100 is a kind of a broad orientation of college, but is our way of getting in front of our students, and then using that as a way also of trying to build up support for dual credit. So that's kind of a workaround, but that's one strategy, if you will. And then certainly in my neck of the woods, there are literally 3 schools that has about 99% of all the RMs out of about 22 throughout the area. I set that up because what has also picked up business I've noted over time certainly is more 4 years getting into dual credit game, competing for our students, if you will. I think third, certainly, gosh, I would say it's probably as late as 2019. I can still think of several of the annual meetings that we have with the superintendents, the guidance counselors. We try to do it twice a year. And it was this big shift away from dual credit, almost like an arms race accumulation, where it was more about accumulating a lot of dual credit as opposed to more clearly defined pathways. Once we got into the high wage, high demand sectors, which was clearly more the technical pathways, that was where a big part of our focus shifted. But you had less and less minority students in that pipeline. I think Alicia, as the data guru, would probably attest. If you look at the transfer pathways in general, that is a tendency where we find just a large number of URMs tend to gravitate toward. So it's this balancing act in many ways, getting access, balancing the defined pathways, and then certainly ways in which we work with the local leaders in K-12, and that certainly is an ongoing process. The last piece I would add to the nature of this sport is such, and I'm sure all my colleagues would agree with this. You watch the evolution, you see where the strengths are, but you also see where the gaps are. There's still a lot of work to do, quite frankly, in terms of making administrators, in a delicate sort of way, be more intentional as they promote opportunities for students to go to college, that there's more clarity and intentionality as to what that looks like. That's how I would put it.
So let me see if I understand that. Are you telling me that with maybe working a little more closely with the high school guidance counselors and assuring that every student is in a pathway that will lead to that success, that's really where we need to focus?
Yeah, and let's put an asterisk there as well too. I think one of the reasons, and again, I'm sure my other colleagues would attest to this as well too. So just generalizing for the most part, about 80–90% of our guidance counselors went to Murray State, great institution. Any discussion about liberal arts, great. If you start talking technical, all hands are off. And so that takes time getting the counselors more knowledgeable, more empowered, and more comfortable, quite frankly, in being able to move students in that direction is what I see more often. And the other thing I would add to this as well too, you may be amazed, but I talk about with even good working relationships, all it takes is one change in personnel, and you basically almost starting over. It's the craziest thing. But that K-12 partnership and the work that it takes to manage those, and then all the politics with the superintendents, principals, it's quite a bit. But that's what we do.
Institutional knowledge is so valuable, and I don't think can be replaced really. When someone retires or leaves or changes a position, it's those relationships that you don't get back for a number of years. I really appreciate that. The reason I'm asking that question, and thank you for that information, Dr. Reese, my husband works with athletes at Morehead State, and I hear this day in and day out about students coming in with all of these credit hours, but things not going toward their degree. And the NCAA's rules about, hours toward degree. I hear this every day. I live this life for the last almost 30 years now. And so that's one of the comments that he has made repeatedly, is that some of these kids have lots of hours, but not hours that really are helpful to them. And that's what I'm kind of hearing you say, is that we don't just want to accumulate hours. We want meaningful hours that are moving them toward their eventual degree, right? So
yeah,
I love the pathway idea. I actually do have this thought that maybe we do not, maybe we exclude too many kids based on what the high school criteria for dual credit is. So in my area, and having had 2 children that went through public education in my area, you had to almost be the cream of the crop to be allowed to take a dual credit class. And I think that that is very unfortunate. Not that every kid shouldn't be doing, their level best to make good grades, but I think that puts those technical kids a little behind. They could be getting some of these hours and accumulating some of these credits toward their technical programs earlier if the high schools weren't so stringent or strict about who could and who couldn't take dual credit. Is there a way for us to be able to change that criteria? Is there anything that we as a board could do to help you get that criteria for who can and cannot take dual credit from the high schools changed? I see a hand up.
Oh, go ahead. No, I would say maybe we have a program to address that specific thing. I'll talk about it after Jennifer then.
Okay, Dr. Linden.
One thing that I was thinking about is the Work Ready Scholarship, because that is available for the high school students for more technical courses. So just promotion of that Work Ready and what courses that it will approve. And it really helps out those area technology center students. And most of us all have a really strong relationship too with our ATC partners. And so the students can get dual credit that way. Again, it's intentional and making sure we're working with those ATCs and making sure we're working those students toward appropriate pathways where they can finish their credential with us, or maybe even finish their technical certificate when they graduate high school. We're lucky at Hazard because we actually serve as the ATC for 3 different high schools. So we serve as the ATC for Perry County, and that involves 3 high schools. So we have those high school students on our campus every day, and we can really work with those students and make sure that they're headed toward the right pathways in healthcare services. We have the healthcare. We have a new pathway this year, which is welding, automotive, carpentry. But we're always looking at what additional pathways that we can offer those students. But I do think a lot of it comes down to that Work Ready Scholarship and working with those counselors, like we've already said, that's critical. I think yesterday we talked about in our PLT a way to recognize the counselors who directed more students our way, and I thought that was a really neat idea to recognize those counselors for their good work.
Yeah, and I think another issue, to be real honest, just the number of counselors is not near enough in the high schools. I mean, you've got one counselor for 1,500 students. And if they get miscounseled, or if they decide they're going to change what they want to do, a lot of times that's where we get into the problem of a student coming in with 30 credit hours or 20 credit hours, and 18 of them don't apply to the program they're in because they were either misinformed or didn't get counseled. Yeah, I hear that all the time. That was something that came up in Frankfurt a couple weeks ago, or last week. I don't know when it was, Hannah. These weeks have already started merging together. But I know the Commonwealth Continuum, where we've been working with, higher ed's been working with K through 12. We're trying to blur that line a little bit and almost get it closer to what a dual enrollment path would look like with a university, to where, you know, I'll take, for example, Moorhead. When someone dual enrolls with us in Moorhead, those Moorhead counselors have access to those same students that we do those first 2 years. And so they've kind of got their hand held on both sides. You know, if we can lower that down into the high schools, I think that's kind of where the sweet spot is.
That was going to be my next question. Would it be worthwhile to make a recommendation from this committee that we find a way to provide that extra hand to the high schools? I know that we have in a recruitment, you know, folks that are going out and doing the, you know, the graduation nights with the high school seniors and talking to parents about dual credit, but is that something we could consider or should consider? What do you all think about that? What if we had a person that was, you know, that was their whole job, was just to manage those students from the high schools for those counselors?
So
take that off their plate completely almost.
There's a fair amount of, I'll call it fear among some of these schools that we're going to get in there and do things differently or more successfully than they're doing them. And that's not going to fare well necessarily. I'm of the opinion, I guess, that, well, we're in 10 counties right now. In every single one of those, to piggyback on what Anton was saying, the superintendent doesn't get many people actively involved in dual credit. They assign it to one person. And then next year they reassign it to somebody else. And then the next year they reassign it to somebody else because it isn't a high priority for them. That's one issue. The second issue is, and I would piggyback on what Paul was saying, is that because we have so few counselors, and the fun students to counsel are those who might get into Vandy or might get into Ohio State or something like that. And so the students who would most benefit from the hand-holding don't get that exposure. They're either mass counseled or they're not counseled at all because that's not sexy, it's not fun. And quite frankly, the community college is probably not where the counselor went to college. So they don't view that as a good pathway, and they're much more focused on the top 10% of the graduating class, and not on the real students that need to that could benefit from that.
So we really want to help that broader base, right?
Sure.
Not just those college-bound students.
Well, and that's why I think we see that in the matriculation of the dual credit students. We don't get nearly the proportion of dual credit students enrolling with us the following semester because they were heading off to anywhere from WKU to Vanderbilt to begin with. And we've battled that all along. And so speaking to the diversity piece for a minute, I would just say that, Jefferson has a lot of the diversity here in the system. And quite frankly, JCPS simply didn't value dual credit at all until the last few years. So our numbers and our proportion, the URM student enrollment has dramatically increased. In part, we're probably driving it because JCPS has finally embraced dual credit. So we went from 2,000 dual credit students to 5,000 dual credit students. And most of that growth is Jefferson County. So you can imagine what that's doing to our diversity numbers. Then one thing that I'm really pleased with that we did, and many school systems resist this, is JCPS also embraced the idea of just what you're talking about. There's so many students who could benefit from dual credit who don't get the chance. So we now take our, quote, developmental classes into JCPS during their junior year, and we offer them for free. So there's no tuition, and they don't have to use their scholarships from the state, their dual credit scholarships, to take these classes, English and math. Basically, the idea is by the time they hit their senior year, they've completed the developmental sequence, and they can take any dual credit course that fits their pathway their senior year to help them be ready for college. So we're in our third year of that. We've got, and we knew this would happen, and we're glad it's happened. Now that JCPS has done it for 3 years, all of a sudden Shelby County and Bullitt County have said, oh, wow, we want to be a part too. So this fall, they're starting the same thing. So we're slowly making that transition, because I've always thought that it's the students who graduate in the 25th to the 75th percentile of their high school class who would benefit most from a dual credit experience. And yet we don't get them in those classes very effectively. So we are trying to address that. Again, it's just for the counselors and the school systems, it's not sexy, and it's not how they used to do it. It used to be dual credit was a reward for the best student, and we're trying to break that mold. So we're having success.
What I'm asking you to, that's what I'm asking you about. That's awesome.
We're having success. It's not easy though. We're battling a lot of historical sort of resistance in the school systems. Okay.
I think the other thing that we battle up against is counselors that really steer students towards AP instead of dual credit.
Absolutely. And they don't get that, and they don't understand it. And, you know, my son took dual credit and AP places, and the dual credit went and the AP didn't, or what have you. So it's not a, people have a universal feeling about AP, and it's not the panacea people think it is.
Well, we've got to, I think, maybe change the conversation about the value of dual credit versus the value of AP. As you said, those kids in those AP classes are probably bound for other places. But as a parent who had children who did both, I agree with you, Ty, that a lot of times those AP credits don't end up transferring even after mom and dad pay for the exam and the kid takes the test and sometimes passes it and sometimes doesn't. And, but dual credit, as long as it's going to count toward their degree, is a much better value. And maybe that's how we address that. But I love those ideas, and thank you for sharing those. Dr. Linden, do you have other ways that you're addressing it in your area?
Well, yes, we have been really strongly working with our counselors. One thing, and our URM students, one thing that I did want to talk about was our apprenticeship program. So I think that is another way to really get the students and the counselors engaged. And our K-Tech apprenticeship program, I think that it has just really reaped benefits. I think that we have 32 students enrolled right now in the K-Tech program, and some of them work throughout the summer. And many of those are working in technical fields. Some of them are in allied health fields. Some of them are in computer fields. Some of them are farm techs. Of course, that's allied health. But really, that K-Tech program has been critical for us in getting in and getting some groundbreaking ideas in with the counselors. So we've really worked on the K-Tech program. And I think one thing that I've been really proud of is that we've had a partnership with UK Center for Rural Health for their community health worker. We had 2 students who graduated last year, and we have 6 who graduated this year, seniors in high school, and they just completed that community health worker certificate. And that's a credential that they get through HCTC. And that's been a really nice partnership with UK. And I did want to touch base and circle back on the URM students for just a minute, that Ty was mentioning some of that as well. With that, we've really tried to get in with the high schools. Of course, we've not been able to get in this year, but we started, I think I might have referenced it in another meeting sometime back with ROC, our Multicultural Student Leadership Council, really getting in with those high school students and really working with them on STEAM efforts. We've brought art into the classrooms, we've brought poetry into the classrooms, and really just tried to mentor some students, get them into thinking about leadership and student leadership. And then hopefully when those students transition over into us at the college level, then they will come back in turn and work with other URM students at the high school level. So we've been able to get this implemented at Buckhorn and at Hazard High School. And it's slowly but surely we're working on our other schools. But that has helped with our URM student enrollment. And that's really helped not only with the dual credit enrollment with URM students, but also when they come over into the college as a full-time student. I think we're up to like a 38%. I was trying to find my numbers. I had them pulled, and we were up from the year before in numbers that we are transitioning from high school over into actual full-time credential-seeking students as URM. So I've been really tickled with our efforts with URM, but that's just a couple of strategies. I'm sure that other people have many more.
So is that like a peer support program then for those URM students?
It is.
Beautiful.
It is.
That's awesome.
It's like we've worked with a group called Peer Forward, and they do wonderful work. They've done quite a bit of work with metropolitan areas and larger colleges, but now they're beginning work with us and Big Sandy and Southeast too, I believe, and really trying out their tactics in rural areas.
Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Zarapata, I see your hand up.
I just wanted to share something. You know, part of the national conversation on dual credit, particularly leadership in Louisiana, Texas, and some others, even Indiana, you know, they've been looking at dual credit and looking at, okay, so upwards, you know, in some instances, 85% of the students that they're offering dual credit to don't come to them, don't come to the community or technical college. If you focus on the CTE education and those dual credit students, those are going upwards of 80% of coming to them. And so in some states, they're almost abandoning the gen ed piece and really going after those CTE credits. And so, you know, I know Ashland, I believe it was Ashland, a big chunk of their dual credit students are CTE. So, you know, I think that could be, we'll see how that resonates here in Kentucky. But, you know, I do know, you know, well, we're close to breaking even on dual credit, but then if we don't see that student once they you know, and we've even got students getting their associate's degree in high school now too. And so, you know, we're gonna have to really make sure that we're targeting the right students.
What about with homeschoolers?
I'm
So
sorry.
it's a market that's harder to get to, of course. But by the same token, we make those available to them. And in many cases, what we have is we have them taking some of the higher level subject matter because the parents may feel less prepared to teach an algebra class or a science class, or they want something with a lab and that sort of thing. And so we do market to them and we do try to reach out to them. But I'm certain we haven't penetrated that market like we have the public schools. We run into some of the same challenges with private high schools as well, as you can imagine. And so that also raises some issues. But almost all parents see the value of a child getting a dual credit experience, especially when they're thinking about what it's going to cost to send them to college.
If cost is the primary belief, right? That's the challenge is we still have this university or bust nonsense. And Kentucky, unlike Texas and Louisiana, where I worked, we don't have an early college strategy. So we don't have a framework for it. So as a board of consequence in the state of Kentucky, that's something that KCTCS can do, working with the data and with CPE, is kind of nudge this thing along so that we've got a strategy so that we're not guessing whether we should be offering dual credit CTE or dual credit whatever. And also, you know, Jefferson's very lucky in some ways that U of L, like UK, is kind of on a different plane of existence, so they don't necessarily care about dual credit. But Moorhead, NKU, EKU, and WKU, they're going after it for their bottom lines, and they are ruining, frankly ruining this whole space because it's not about serving students, it's about serving enrollment.
I see Regent Witten's hand up for quite a while. I appreciate her patience. Regent Witten.
Yes, thank you. I've just been furiously taking notes, and I truly appreciate all the president's point of views related to the identification of pathways just this week. my child happens to go. She's a dual credit student. She's on campus now, but she's got a couple of friends who are nursing pathways. And it was not identified to them that they should be in Bio 137. They were enrolled in Bio 135. So that would have put them an entire calendar year behind to enroll to the nursing program because they only admit in March. So I don't think, while I think we are making strides, I'm not sure that we are putting enough focus on identification of pathways for those dual credit students. I do truly also appreciate the Work Ready Scholarship. Like Dr. Linden said, the ATCs are super important in making that work. The problem is, once again, those counselors just not being educated enough in those scholarships just to push the technical education over the transfer education. Another thing that we see regionally, and I'm just curious for the other presidents if this is an issue. I know Dr. Handy, you mentioned your work with the local school boards. There are policies regionally for us that prohibit students from taking work ready or getting work ready credit or even stepping foot on campus if they don't benchmark on that ACT. So the policies are more stringent than perhaps they even need to be, other than just benchmarking. So my question there is, what can we do to kind of bridge that gap and allow for the enrollment of more of those students, particularly the work ready scholarship students? And then finally, sorry, I told you I was taking a lot of notes. My kid has taken the AP classes too, so I feel your pain. We're one for two on those. But I do have a question as it relates to Senate Bill 1, Dr. Zarapata. Perhaps you can answer this. I did some quick Googling on KDE's website, and it looks like it's KRS 160-348. And it's talking about Senate Bill 1 saying that report cards, the school report cards, which we all know, the public schools are under, the magnifying glass on this. But it says, of course, that it's going to report the advanced placement courses offered and the number of students enrolled and taking the examination for each course and the percentages who score 3 or better. So I guess the question I would have for the legislators would be, why can't we add dual credit to that? It's college level work. It's no different than them taking the AP class. And I think that's one of the big, distractors in our region is that the schools want that to look good. We had 100 kids take an AP World Civ test. Well, great. How many passed? Right? Maybe 4. So I wonder if that's something that we could maybe have a discussion with, the legislators to talk about, perhaps amending that, because they're already offering the scholarships. Kentucky's already putting the money up for these kids. Why can't we make it count on the school report card where it matters for KDE and the local school districts? Thank you.
That is a great initiative, actually, because that might be the motivation those counselors and those superintendents need to really start moving this. Now, I want to make sure if we do something like that, that we're very careful to not make the technical education program seem like it's a second, well, if you don't benchmark, then you can do this. No, there are some very strong students who are very interested in technical education who are able to come into our programs, and readily succeed. I don't want it to be a consolation prize, I guess is what I'm saying. Great questions. Anybody want to answer any of those? And I do see, and I want to recognize Dr. Williams also with her hand up.
Thank you. I do want to just respond to a couple of the comments that Regent Litton made. One is the pathways. We do have a set of validated pathways between our faculty and curriculum committees and the KDE career pathways. There are 21 of them, sort of, for lack of a better word, the most popular. They start in the 9th grade. If a 9th grade meet the minimum requirements for a technical course, and sometimes they're able to do that because there's not necessarily a reading and writing comprehension component. It's more of a skills-based course. And so they can get 2 scholarships in each of those 4 years for the technical. And there is not usually an ACT requirement. So we have tried really hard to push those pathways out with our partners at KDE, but we know they don't always get in the hands of the right folks. But we can certainly share those with you all if you want to see them and show you the document that's been validated. And then on your ACT point, the Council on Post-Secondary Education requires a certain grade point average or the ACT for the general education courses, and we don't really have any recourse around that. It's a CPE guideline that they, we've argued for changing, but they have not. For a while, we were using grade point average only, but that's not possible anymore in the general education courses. So were you talking about local mandates about who participates?
Yes, that's my concern. And I didn't know that was the question I wanted to put out to the presidents that are here. If their school districts just adhere to those, I'm aware of those, but local school districts in our area, some of them have more stringent policies related to dual credit. And I get that that is totally within their purview and their local school board. I just wonder if some of those aren't perhaps antiquated and haven't been updated with, the real push for the Work Ready Scholarship and the dual credit scholarships from KIA. So that was my question. I do realize that students need to meet those benchmarks for those general education courses. It's more, are we having those conversations locally with local school superintendents saying, might want to push this to your board to say why you have such a strict policy and it's really hampering a lot of your students from going above and beyond.
Is that something that we would want to put any resources into, or ask maybe someone from our local colleges to attend the school board meetings and give some information about what could be done if that policy perhaps were different? I see Ty, I see your hand up.
Well, for us, we had to go on a bit of an educational bend with them to help them understand that one of the ways to classify a student as college ready under Kentucky rules is for them to successfully have completed a couple of dual credit courses. And then test scores don't matter and other things don't matter. If they've done that, they're labeled college ready. And when JCPS recognized that, all of a sudden they made a major administrative push to start making sure more students were enrolled and we were growing those programs, because quite frankly, it looked more like a path of less resistance for getting students to that college ready benchmark. So we unashamedly have been using that with our superintendents and our school systems to try to broaden the appeal. I do want to go back to one other thing so that I want to be careful that we don't think of dual credit as either CTE or gen ed, because quite frankly, just like the regular operations of our college, I'm routinely telling folks that our general education curriculum is probably the largest financer of our technical programs. It's bigger than the state subsidy, that's for sure. That having the students and all those students in those gen ed classes is what generates the cash that lets us have a dozen people in a lab, in a welding lab. And if we trade off one for the other, then we won't have either. And that's an important piece of our financial model that a lot of people don't understand. Quite frankly, to be just obvious about it, gen ed is a cash cow. And just like many companies that have a cash cow, they use that cash cow to fund the other very important stuff that they do. And for us, it's technical education. So we want to find that right balance between the two, because that is a part of how we finance everything we do as a college. So I don't want that to get lost. We want both to grow and prosper, not trade off one for the other.
I agree.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment too. So how can we as a committee take the information that we've been given today and put forth a recommendation to the board in the full board meeting? Or do you even feel like at this point we need to? I mean, it sounds like you all have some great initiatives going on already. How do we help you meet your goals for not just URMs, but increasing enrollment for these students in general?
So I would say one thing might just simply be and I'm just speaking myself, I'd love to know the best practices of the other 15 colleges that are getting them successful with this school system or that school system. So some sort of, I don't call it an expectation, but sort of an acknowledgement that we need to be sharing best practices, benchmarking why different schools are more successful than others, and trying to see what they're doing. And maybe there's things that are being done that beg to be replicated across the system. And I'm not sure that we really find the time to have that kind of conversation. And dual credit is one of those where if we have a successful program in a couple of colleges, it might be well worth the time to try to figure out how it gets replicated across to others. It's not something the board needs to do, just emphasize.
It's just
And then
something the board wants to support. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
and then the second piece then is that's drilling down into the system. Drilling up is helping CPE and our legislators understand, what dual credit, the promise of dual credit for high school students in Kentucky and what it can do, and helping them, quite frankly, understand that while AP has its place, it is dual credit has become the predominant model around the country, and we ought to be trying to embrace that and figure out how to break down the barriers in those school systems instead of putting them in place. It seems to me that 75% of kids coming out of high school ought to have had a dual credit experience in this day and age. If they're not, we're probably not serving those students as well as some other places are. So for what that's worth, those two things, they're really not things that the board does other than the board reinforces.
And I think that there's an opportunity working with Dr. Zarapata and his cabinet is to have the board really fully understand what Ty is talking about, the opportunities and challenges as a state. And then, certainly internally with our action teams and our PLT retreats, I mean, we do a lot of cross-pollination of stuff. I mean, I think maybe some formal conversations around these sorts of things, but I'm telling you, even in our district, we have, 5 basic counties that we work with, but it's like 30 school districts. And then there's changeover every other week. And so, I mean, even if we could only get to a sustainable, repeatable enrollment process and a calendaring with these high schools, that would be enormously wonderful. But the reality is, it is so nuanced in every school district that until we have some sort of broader reaching policy or broader reaching approach with KDE that can actually implement things, because the superintendents don't even control their high schools. The principals run that, and then it's usually not the principals, it's 3 or 4 people on the faculty, and all our counselors are NKU grads, so you can imagine how many times, we got our first one, right? We got our first gateway counselor got hired this year. All to say that I think that Dr. Zarapata is really keyed in on what's going on at the larger state levels, what's been successful in Texas and Louisiana. And I think that there are some cross-pollinations and abilities for the board to become informed of those things and then figure out what's a way in which we can work with the other boards of influence, including CPE, to maybe nudge some stuff in the direction that makes sense for Kentucky. Because again, 40% of the undergraduates are KCTCS, and performance funding aside, the fact that we're only funded at 20%, the other issue is you're not going to get the 60 by 30 without us. And you're not going to get to an economic prosperity in the state of Kentucky without us. And a dual credit, it is a reason why Texas has gone nuts with early college, is because they actually built something around it.
I do
fully expect that we will hear from Dr. Zarapata on the information that he's garnered from a lot of these meetings he's been at and how that's going to help us here. I guess in talking through all of this, and we do need to move on, we have a hefty agenda still, and it's already 5:20. We could probably talk about any one of these things all night. But so I always try to think of, if you take the people out of the equation, how do you shore up the system so that the next person coming in or that transition being made doesn't make the whole system fail? And so how can we put together perhaps a managing dual credit counseling handbook or something that any counselor could pick up and work through and get those questions that maybe they don't know the answers to on the technical side of the house answered, regardless of who the student in front of them is or who the counselor or the principal or the superintendent beside of them is. Maybe that's something we could look at doing, something that wouldn't have to be updated every semester or even every year, but just kind of a basic education piece to hand out to those counselors, and not just the personal relationships and the meetings. And as Ty said, making counseling those students sexy again. if it ever was, but, something that would really just be a good concrete piece of material we could leave with them that would kind of guide them through the process, at least with us.
I think a good start might be to engage with the dual credit peer team, ask their input. That's all 16 colleges represented and the system office, and let them come back with something.
I think that's that's probably where we need to go with that. Okay, unless there's something really pressing, we need to move on. Anyone have anything else they want to say there? And thank you all. That's great information. So I really appreciate the presidents sharing their experiences with that. And again, I love the figuring out those best practices and moving them across the system. That's going to be much more efficient. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the enrollment patterns of KCTCS, and Chancellor Williams going to give us that update.
Thank you very much, Chair. You shared an article by Inside Higher Ed that cited results from the 2022 Changing Landscape of Online Education survey. And while it had a point-counterpoint sort of discussion going on internally, it really spoke to the fact that most undergraduate education will feature a significant online component by 2025. So ORPA said, well, what are the enrollment patterns of KCTCS graduates in in-person classes, online, and hybrid? And so I appreciate that Alan Lawson in particular, but certainly the whole office pushed in on this report, and I'm going to ask Alicia to share the results with you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. So I think there are three key takeaways that I want to share from this report. So the first is looking at our degree graduates, so those who end up with an associate degree, nearly universally, they have exposure to an online course. So 98% of our associate degree graduates have taken at least one online course. With the pandemic, we have seen that percentage increase. So of 2019-2020 graduates, 97% took at least one online course, and that increased to 98% in 21-22. We do see a little bit of a difference in the AA and the AS transfer pathways versus the AAS, with the AA and the AS being more likely, 99% in the latest year of data that we have versus 97% in those AAS pathways. But again, nearly universal. And then if you'll scroll down to table number 2, so while there is nearly universal students taking at least one online class, we do still see a significant amount of education taking place in in-person classes. So about 50% of the courses that the degree graduates take are in person, about 40% online, and about 10% in hybrid courses. And a hybrid course is one where about 40 to 75% of that coursework is taking place in an online environment and the rest in an in-person environment. So again, with the pandemic and with increasing online literacy, you are seeing the percent of courses taken online increase over time. So those 2019-20 graduates, 36% took a course online, and that increased to 44.7% in 21-22. And then the third point I want to make is that there's some subpopulation data in here. So we really want to drill down and bring the board data about what's happening to different populations. In the analysis of subpopulations, you'll see across the board there really is a growth in the percentage of students taking percentage of courses taken online and the percentage of students taking at least one online course. In the age group, as you would expect, younger students are more likely to take online courses. There's no substantial difference by gender. So in the race ethnicity, if you scroll down a little bit, underrepresented minority students are a little less likely to take an online course, but that gap is shrinking. So we've seen that gap shrink over time. In the degree type, so as I mentioned above, the AAS graduates do enroll in a higher percentage of in-person courses. Why is that? So below that, you will see course type data, and what you'll see there is that the gen ed courses, the general education courses, are those most likely to be taking place online. So where technical courses are a little less likely to take place online, but maybe more in a hybrid environment. But again, both for the gen ed and the technical courses, the percentage that are online or in hybrid models is increasing. But thank you
Thank
for
you.
the opportunity to provide a summary.
Thank you, Alicia. We do just want to point out that we do see our students being much more comfortable with online learning, particularly as they were sort of forced into it, many of them during the pandemic. And we are working not only as the board has directed to really ensure a stronger standard of quality across those online courses, but also thinking about how that hybrid course works. So is the student, doing their studying in a sort of flipped classroom before they go and then do a technical lab, for example. So their didactic work is online, but their hands-on work is in the classroom. So we still have lots of opportunity, but it was interesting to really take a deep dive into how our students are changing as the years go past in this educational mode. So we appreciate you bringing up the article, Chair.
Thank you. And I do hope that, and it sounds like it probably was helpful to kind of help us look into this a little bit more. Have we surveyed those URM students to see maybe why that is the case, that they are less likely than their other peers to take an online course? Do we think it's an access to technology? Is it an access to equipment? Is it broadband? Like, what, do we have any ideas why?
It's a combination of the above, really. I mean, you got one of the things that we certainly learned through COVID is the disproportionate impact and lack of resources, whether it's affording laptops, geographically where they live, transportation, childcare. Even those factors may impact students in general. Is a disproportionate impact, I think, is a big part of that as well. There's also a cultural piece. Some would submit, generalizing, of course, that for many within the URM population, particularly first gen, work is a big factor. And so, for some, top priority is maybe getting enough jobs to maintain households, that type of thing. That really limits then the opportunities to choose one mode or the other. But I think all those factors are just disproportionately impacted. But it's an opportunity to bridge the gap.
Thank you for that insight. Does anybody else have any questions about this particular report? Okay, well, hearing none, we will move right along. So as we are talking about the number of students increasing in those online courses, do you have any update on the progress? I know we're supposed to hear a report in December, but any update on the online program, the online quality program?
Sure, I'd be happy to provide that. So in a document that was shared with you all, there's a timeline that we're taking to look at, it's been approved essentially or endorsed by the president's leadership team, and it has been shared with the online learning peer team, and they are moving forward. In fact, I just got a document this morning from our Office of Online Learning and some of the early work of the peer team, looking at the concerns you all have raised about how consistently colleges are applying our Kentucky KEYS standards, our Kentucky Essential Standards for online, how prepared faculty are to apply the KEYS in their online teaching, and how faculty are using the KEYS to assess their own teaching and course design. And so in the recommendation, the Board of Regents asked that we start with the Senate Council. We did that Senate Council orientation in August, on August the 5th, I think it was. We did an overview of the recommendation, both from the ROC and then to the board and the board's passage, and then spoke to the process, shared the timeline that's been approved that you all have in your documentation, and which is available for KCTCS folks on the Chancellor's Office Info Center under materials for this group. And so, Brianna, you were at that orientation, I think. Would you mind to just speak to kind of if you felt like it was a good overview? excuse me, Regent Witten.
No, yeah, that's it. No, you're fine. I did, and the feedback also, Dr. Williams, that I received from faculty was very, especially the Senate members, it was helpful. They felt more supported. I think some of those things. I mean, it's been a very, it's been a long process, but it's been a very, switching from Learn to Ultra, and for older faculty who, I mean, I don't even talk about myself, right? It's a harder switch. I mean, we don't like to learn new technology like after 35 years old. So I think, putting forth that idea and having the support and knowing that the system office is dedicated to the support of this. And I'll also just say, as an aside, I met with Dr. Simpson and Dr. Williams because we had some concerns at Maysville just directly about our process and how we were doing and what we, our plans moving forward. And now we've opened up this great line of communication with the system office around quality assurance. So all the feedback, Dr. Williams, that I've received so far locally and across the state has been very well received.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think as faculty are understanding that, one, they'll be a very strong part of the process, and two, we're building on a lot of work that's already done, but we're making sure everybody understands the work that's been done because, faculty come and go and administrators come and change roles. And so there's been a sort of a continuum of work, but not necessarily a continuum of really putting it together into a holistic package. So this recommendation has really allowed us to sort of embrace that and try and pull together all this work and make sure that everybody's aware of the why and of the value to the student and of the value to the faculty member who will be, more comfortable in the online environment, and then putting that into a package. So I think it's been a great start. We'll have a good report for you to give in September if you'd like us to write something up for that. And then certainly in December, both the Senate Council will hear the next iteration in October. Their meeting is October 28th. But then both the board and the Senate Council will get updates in December for a pilot that will start in January. And it will start, as this group suggested, on the 3 gateway courses at each institution that seem to have the most need for a review.
Very good. Thank you. So that was actually, it was just such a great segue. I couldn't pass it up. That was actually the third recommendation in our next agenda item as we get the updates on the previous recommendations from the ROC to the board. So does anyone else have any questions on the standardization of online course quality for Dr. Williams, or anything that you want to share that's going well within your colleges by any of the presidents at this point? If not, we'll back up and go back to recommendation 1. But I don't want to leave anybody out. I do not see any hands. Oh, I see Brianna.
Okay. Just really quickly, can you clarify? I know you said the Chancellor's Office Info Center. Did you give another pathway in which to get to that?
I'm sorry.
I wrote it down. I wrote it down kind of hastily, so I didn't know if you actually.
I'm sorry, I can send you the link. It's an internal office, so it's the materials that were shared. It's the same materials that were shared with the Resource Optimization Committee.
Thank you.
Okay. So recommendation 1 on the progress update is actually has to do with the RFP that has been offered and has now been closed. We are looking to hire the outside entity to do the review for building utilization, optimization, including college operations, program offerings, making sure that that our diversity and inclusion and equality efforts are consistent across the system. So the committee has met. The ROC did meet last week to review the RFPs. That process is moving forward. I do not know. Let me look and see. I don't know that I can see if. Is Becca with us, Dr. Zarapata?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
She is not. I'm sorry. She actually had a scheduled appointment out of the office today, or she would have been here. But she is working on getting the dates for the follow-up from the last RFP meeting.
Okay, thank you. So most of that meeting, as you all know, the RFP process, some of that has to be done in closed session. The part that has to be done in closed session has been completed. So we did come back and ask for presentations, and that's what's now going to be brought back to the committee for follow-up. So as soon as that process is complete and a vendor has been chosen, then that whole process of what happens next will become much more transparent once we have narrowed down who we're going to be working with. So the first report on the vendor's work will come back to the Board of Regents, and hopefully the vendor will be able to make at least a brief presentation to the board by then. But again, the process is well underway. It's going well. Very thoughtful comments. I appreciate all of you all participating in that. And hopefully we will be hearing back from Becca about the presentations and the date for that forthcoming. So I'm confident in that presentation. I do want to address a couple of things that have questions that have been brought up from Regents during this RFP proposal process. One is, would the system office be included in any analysis for not only space but optimization? And absolutely they are included, and it is outlined and detailed in the RFP. I believe it's in section 2 of that. Another question had to do with, give me just a second and let me make sure I'm responding to all the questions that were asked. Oh, another just had to do with the transparency of the process. And again, transparency is kind of my middle name, W.T. Fletcher. The T is for transparency. It will be as transparent as I possibly can allow it to be by law. That's the way I work, and that's the way I will push this committee along, is being very transparent. And then the last question that came out of that had to do about breakdown of how the optimization analysis would be funded. And Dr. Zarapata has offered information on that, and will give a further report on that to the full board in September. So I do hope, and if any of the other regents are listening in and have any other questions, please do forward those to me. I'm happy to answer those, but I think that that kind of hits the highlights of the questions that were answered, so, or that were asked. Does anybody here have any questions? I see a hand up. Let me figure out who that is. I've got 17.
It's me.
Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead.
I may be getting things conflated, but wasn't the compensation study recommended by this group too, or was that outside of ROC?
No, that was also recommended. Well, that was actually previously recommended by the full board, but then kind of passed over to the.
I thought it would be good if we could. Lynn Hillis is here. She's our new vice president. Lynn, would you mind giving a quick update on that RFP?
Yeah, sure. So nice to meet everybody virtually on the phone. So we had the RFP came back last Tuesday, I believe, and we only had one bidder. So I have gone back to take a look at that RFP, made some suggestions. I actually sent it to Pam earlier this week because I wanted to get her to opine on it as well. We'll actually go back out to market, I'm hoping by next week. The bidder that had responded, they really don't even have a background in compensation. The other piece that I did was I took the luxury of making this more tied around attracting and retaining and promoting and career pathing for our employees, given our situation with retention and attraction. So it does read a bit different. I think the first round was more of a compression study. This, I think, is that plus some other pieces as well.
That sounds wonderful, and thank you and welcome. Welcome to your
Thank
first
you.
ROC committee meeting. We're so thrilled that you're here.
Thank
We're
you.
hearing all good things, so keep up that good work. But,
Oh, good. Okay, good.
we appreciate the RFP update on that. Yes, that was a recommendation of the board as part of the compression information we'd received over, I guess, a year ago. And then this committee took it a step further, and that also includes what is in our next recommendation to be discussed, which was the dedicated diversity coordinator or director positions at the colleges. And the recommendation was that we have someone who at least had a 50% part of their position or part of their role was at least 50% dedicated. And I do believe that we have an update on that across the colleges as well. Now, Lynette, will you be given that, or will that come from Chancellor Williams?
No, I'll give that. Still new to the game, so still learning myself. So I'll ask Dr. Williams to chime in, or Dr. Zarapata, or the presidents as well. So the presidents have made great effort on this. And so back in June, when we first presented, we were at about a third, well, we were 37.5% of our colleges did not have this particular role. As of August 18th, we have 100% of the colleges have identified. I'm not sure if the document dated August 18th reflects that. It said that Big Sandy didn't have anyone, but Big Sandy and Ashland have agreed to share. And if you look at Ashland, they actually have two resources, one 90% dedicated, one 80% dedicated. So, these are fairly new positions for some of the colleges. So at this point, I don't have any information on what some of those positions are doing, but that might be something that the presidents can lend some information to.
Okay, and I do believe, Hannah, were you able to get in and update the spreadsheet for Somerset as well? Somerset was misrepresented at 50%, right? And now they are 100.
They're 100.
Corrected.
They are 100.
Yep.
Well, I know the board is going to be so pleased to hear this new data and to see that 100% of the colleges are participating in this initiative. And we really put a high priority on this. So it's wonderful to see this already come into fruition. So thank you. Anyone want to speak to this particular piece, to this report, or tell us how it's going with if they're new positions, how it's going with your new folks?
Speak to that a little bit. I think I mentioned in a previous meeting that we hired a former student, and so he's 50% right now in his director of diversity title, and then he's 50% recruitment and admissions, because we're really wanting him to learn all of the various processes within student services, because we think that will really help him in his future role. So we're really trying to kind of grow our own, if you will, and taking a former student who we saw that had quite a bit of leadership potential. And I think many throughout KCTCS are already familiar with their student, and he is a mover and a shaker. I think he's going to do a wonderful job. And of course, we'll post the position, but he should have a really good shot at it. But we're hoping to be able to post that position in December, and then when he completes his bachelor's degree, which would be in December, he'd be able to apply for the position. So we'll do a search, but we are full well hoping to hire a director of diversity that would start in January, and he is already working 50% in that role and doing a wonderful job.
Very good. Thank you for that. Anyone else have a success story? Oh, sorry, Dr. Zarapata.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I would just like to say how I'm really proud about how our presidents reacted to this and really stepped up quickly and came into form, and it's just very proud.
Thank you for that. I'm sure the board's going to be so happy to hear this report. Anyone else have any comments? Okay, well, that concludes our old business. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We are slated to go until 6 o'clock. It's now 5:45. So we will go ahead and move into new business and see how much of this that we can actually get through. Let's see, my document is downloading. Give me just a second. So I did ask Hannah to include this in the materials. This is the report, the 2022 progress report from Kentucky CPE. I did want everyone, if you haven't already, I don't know, Dr. Zarapata, have you and the presidents had a chance to look at this? Is everyone kind of versed in this already?
I got walked through it today at the CPE President's Council meeting, and so we walked through each page of it this morning out in Frankfurt, but we have not walked through it as a full PLT yet.
Do you want to make some comments about that? I knew that meeting was coming up. That was literally today. So any fresh ideas coming out of this report?
Well, I think overall, Aaron is pretty happy with the progress that we've made, but we've got a lot of work to do. The college going rate is something that he's very concerned about. I don't know exactly which page of this report it's on, but it's dipped all the way down to, like, I can read six.
Sorry, I should have done it like a ref. 15, page 15.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Page 15, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was like 53.8 was the college going rate. I thought in aggregate, for KCTCS, there wasn't much criticism. There was actually, they were happy with where we were going. Of course, the one low light was enrollment, and enrollment has gone down pretty considerably over, I think it was a 5-year span. And again, I don't remember what page that's on either, but we've got a lot of work to do. Dr. Williams, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I wasn't going to speak to the progress report. I was just putting my hand up to point out later that in a conversation I had with Jessica Cunningham, who's the lead for KY Stats, she noted that 1/6 of our high school, we have a pretty good high school graduation rate, but 1/6 of those students disappear. They don't go to college. They don't go to work. We can't track them. That's a really big piece of population. And it scares me every morning when I think about that number of students who are not contributing in some way, to their own lives or to the lives of their families. And I didn't mean to interrupt your speech. Just wanted to put my hand up to say that that's a place I feel like we can make an impact, either through dual credit or through our partnerships with the high schools, but somehow capturing those students as they're leaving and then not losing them, to Kentucky, to the state.
Thank you for that. Dr. Zarapata, you want to continue?
Sure, and I don't have my hard copy of this in front of me, but I can certainly pull up see if I can recognize any of the highlights from earlier today. And like I said, we just went over this today. So
they did not point out anything KCTCS was not doing well, or, you said there's lots of room for improvement. Are you talking as a whole or as a system?
As a whole in higher education. And now what you may be talking about when we get called to the table is in September to go over our CPE placemat. That's going to happen on day 1, which I think is the 18th maybe. And that's when we will present our data to the CPE board. And so I don't know what their feedback is going to be. I've not heard anything yet.
But based on what you heard today, you're ready to do that in September?
Oh, absolutely. We're working on our placemat right now.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments about the CPE report or had a chance to review it prior to? That's why I wanted it in there, so everyone would have a chance to look at it and ask any questions.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in the report, but we did. Our marketing team was involved in a survey. And I can't remember exactly who created the survey. Hannah, maybe you can correct me on that one. But when you look at percentage of Kentuckians that think that education beyond a high school diploma is necessary, only 50% think that. That's a problem.
I do think, though, I do think sometimes it's how you ask that question. And I think if we drill down into asking people about specific skills and things of that sort that we do at the college level, we'll find that a lot more people view that as valuable. So I think, you know, depending on how you ask the question, I can drive that percentage down by asking the question in a very tight framework, or I can drive that percentage up by asking it more broadly and people recognizing what technical programs, you know, that they just don't realize that HVAC and construction trades and nursing and allied health, most people just don't realize that's a collegiate program.
Right. So the definition of what college is and what it's not, right, getting us beyond the ivory tower and the spas and the walking, programs, that is one big thing that needs to be done in the state. The other is, just that missing population. And everybody's scratching their head about this. Where are this sizable population of folks disappearing to? We call them opportunity youth up here, is the program that's involved in that. And, got a lot of people working on this, but it's just this weird, unofficial gap year.
One of the things I was really proud of, though, is if you look on page 19 of the report and in undergraduate degrees and credentials, and you look at URM, we've gone from 3340 in 15-16 all the way up to 4878, which is a huge jump. Very proud of that. Our target is 5263. I'm pretty confident we can hit that, but that was something that really stood out in this report.
Well, and I think that KCTCS stands as the transition, that people can achieve and understand and can pay for and can see as immediately relevant. It's really interesting in discussions with some of our newly elected officials or newly primaried officials up here. There's a lot of talk about universities and whether universities are worth it, but no one questions our value. No one questions our connection to the workplace or, the fact that we are the solution for Kentucky. Now, how does that work within the hearts and minds of families? How does that work in the hearts and minds of high school folk? How does that work in the hearts and minds of, our elected officials? That's where a lot of this is still, it's Kentucky wanting to be something else, but not changing anything about itself.
But I think the fact that we are so well respected in what we do and how we do it, that's a perfect opportunity for us to be the educators on a lot of these initiatives to get more of these kids into dual enrollment, more into college, more into the technical programs. I think that's very well said and not a point that's missed by me or anyone else, I think, on this call.
Yeah.
So
If our brand starts to really shine as the first best start into this post-secondary world, that's when I think Kentucky starts to make a turn.
yeah, I think we have a real opportunity there. So let's not lose sight of that or the momentum to get us there, right?
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm gonna have to reboot. I've lost all video.
Uh-oh, we can
I'll be
still
right
see you. Okay. So while he is rebooting and hopefully, let's see, I do see a hand. Hang on, let me figure out who that is. This is really difficult on one computer. That's why I had my triple screens up here. Regent Whitten.
It's me. Yeah. No, one of the things you were asking about things that showed that I had concerns with or anyone had concerns with, and mine was the retention rate, right? And our nearest neighbor, right, and geographically to Maysville, our nearest neighbor is the closest one, and they're about 14% higher than us on retention. Everybody else seems to be kind of knocking it out of the park. And I realize it's university. When they get to that, that level of educational attainment, they're more dedicated to stay. But, they even have a footnote or a highlight there that says that retention fell 1.6 percentage points. I'm just curious, what we're doing. I know some things that we're doing as a system. I just kind of wanted to, things maybe individual colleges are doing to improve that number. Dr. Linden, sorry, Chair Fletcher, I just called on her. Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay.
Well, I agree. One of the things that I wrote down as a concern on here was retention. That was kind of the main thing that I wrote down actually as a concern. A lot of the other things didn't surprise me too much. And I do think that's a concern for all of our colleges, and I know we're all working on it in various ways. Some of the things that we're doing is just trying to really focus on those wraparound services and hiring additional success coaches. Of course, they're grant funded, so I have to look at how am I going to sustain those success coaches once the grant ends. But at any rate, I do have several success coaches now stationed on each campus, and we have what we call student success zones where the student can go to and get connected with, whether it's a tutor and an academic resource, or whether they need assistance with childcare or transportation voucher, something like that. It's kind of a one-stop shop for student retention, and we're calling it a success zone. I'm sure it's called other things at other colleges, but really looking at those wraparound supports and how can we put more manpower into that. And of course, if you put more manpower into it, it costs money, but hopefully you'll get a return on that with your retention, and your students will stay longer and take an additional number of credit hours and graduate and complete. So hopefully it pays off, and hopefully you're able to fund those success coaches, but really looking at those wraparound services and just trying to help those students in every way possible. And that's so important now for Eastern Kentucky colleges too, as we're trying to muddle our way through this whole natural disaster, and our students need more support now than ever.
I've got a couple of specific initiatives. One, we as in the campus leadership spent the bulk of this summer, certainly beginning this fall, engaging in what I call a series of holistic reviews. And at the core of that is retention, because it also has impacts, as we know, on enrollment and graduation, persistence and graduation rates. The holistic review in many ways is just basically a moniker that we say so much within the academy, that we make data-driven decisions. The question is, what data specifically are we looking at? So intentionally looking at bottom line, the ABC, and then the DFW, right? D, failure or withdrawal rates. And are we aligning resources to really have an impact, almost with surgical precision within those areas? Tough conversations, but necessary conversations, one. And then two, the single biggest investment that we put forth from the Mackenzie Scott funds was the launching of our Student Success Center. We're doing the official ribbon cutting here September, I believe is the 18th, and make on that date a couple of days off. But at the core of it is a building is one thing, or revamp space, but more so it is the thought that we're shifting from a deficit model to a success model. And that deficit model, quite frankly, in part, I think has as much to do with the expectation levels that we have of students even coming in. At the 4-year level, to talk about sink or swim. In some ways, we do a different version of that, and we justify it by, I think some people confuse rigor with rigid, as an example, right? So retention certainly is a big focus of ours, and we got some intentional steps to try to address those.
So I would say from Jefferson, we've really focused everybody's attention on this notion of retaining students and getting them through to graduation. And it's just been the singular effort that we've made for the last 6 years or so. And to the point where when we get requests that don't align with that, we try to buffer them by not making sure they don't wind up with people in people's laps who need to be working on student success. So we're really focused on that, and it's the only thing largely that I talk about when I talk about the progress of the college to folks internally. As a result, I mean, I'll use our graduation rate that 6 years ago it was 10.9% over a 3-year period. So if you come out 6 years, it's now 35%. So we have more than tripled it, and with really 3 graduating classes is all we have had. So I'm stunned that we've come so far so fast, and we've done it through a process called 4 Disciplines of Execution, 4DX. It's a Franklin Covey model, and which shows no sign of letting up. We're going to be up another 5% this year, and while we've restructured that. We were very quantitatively focused for the first 5 years, but people are getting burnt out on tracking number of credentials and retention rates, and they're just getting tired of hearing that. It's not very personal. So we've moved to a new set of metrics starting this year, and basically the metrics are more qualitative, and we're trying to focus around giving students a sense of belonging. If students feel they matter and they belong here, they're going to stay and they're going to persist and they're going to graduate. And so I have no concerns that our rates are going to go the other direction as a result of this. But I think it breathes a new life into a process. You just can't keep doing the same thing for year after year after year after year. We got to breathe new life in it. So that's what we're doing right now. And so I give credit to all the employees who have stepped in and said, boy, this is important work, and we're going to focus on saving each and every individual student. And that's really where it's happened.
And then
that's great. And I'm a huge proponent of only measure what matters. Don't measure everything unless everything matters. And being able to focus in on those key principles, as you just mentioned, that's excellent. That's one of those best practices that I think we probably should take across the system. So,
and I would just ask, we all need to remember that when it's time to ask people to do things, and we're giving them a laundry list of things they're supposed to check off, and we end up doing each of those things to an average level instead of doing it to a level of excellence if we only had 1 or 2 key things we were really focused on. And that's what this is all about.
That's exactly what this committee is all about: optimization, optimizing our resources, consolidating where we can, making sure that we are spending our energy and focusing our resources where they're going to matter most. So that is a comment not lost on me. I appreciate that. Okay, any other comments there? We've only got a couple of things and we are now at 6:03. So I will just very quickly tell you the next item in our new business after the progress report was some information that I had requested. And this was really just to start the conversation to get kind of some basic numbers in front of us about college budgets. And then I do have a question for the presidents, because it was mentioned to me by another regent. There was a question about an influx of money that happened at a particular college during an accreditation period. And so then I had also requested information about the accreditation cycle. And I wanted to ask the presidents, is there something different that happens in an accreditation year as far as money being moved in or moved out of your budgets? Or is it just coincidental that that's the way it happens?
So we just went through accreditation 2 years ago. There was absolutely no money. We'd have grabbed it in a heartbeat if they were floating money towards us. There was none of that. Now, I do think as a system sometimes, and this was a comment made to me from Wendell, and I was in charge of I was the chair of one of the subcommittees of the presidents that worked closely with Wendell, that they might use some local financial institutions a little heavy. In other words, they got bank accounts around the state for different things. And if they know that accreditation is coming in, they might use a financial institution in that neighborhood a little more heavily or what have you. But it really isn't something that's reflected in my reserves and certainly not in my operating budget. So I will admit that raised my eyebrows a little bit when I heard that. But after going back and looking at our actual financials, there was nothing moved in and moved out of our financials during any sort of a visit. And I also think SACS accreditation, while they come in and look at those things, they don't drill down to that level of looking. I don't think those evaluators, unless there's the teams I've been on, and I've chaired teams before, don't look at individual things like that very closely. So it's probably not necessary if anything ever did happen. That's my take on it. And again, 2 years ago we had it, and there was absolutely no conversations between us and the system about doing anything differently financially for us. And we were an institution in peril about 6 years ago. So we had to demonstrate to SACS that our financial ship was righted and sound because we had problems.
And I think that's where the question came from. Dr. Handy was the regent that pointed it out. I think at their college, there was a question as to whether or not they were financially, looking financially solvent. And then all of a sudden there was an influx of money. Dr. Zarapata or Chancellor Williams, could you speak to that just so that we can clear the air on that particular subject?
Go ahead, please, Dr. Zarapata.
No, I was just going to say, I'm not aware of any types of things that tie in with accreditation, but then again, I've never personally been through one.
I was just going to add to what Dr. Handy said. There is a financial review component, but I'm not aware of how money would be moved around to support that component.
Okay, good. All right, so that would answer that question for Regent Herding. Thank you for that. Okay, so again, there is a little miniature slide deck in here of college budgets and requested information that had to do with state appropriation per college, tuition generated by each college, the number of FTE students, the employee headcount, and the number of locations. And again, this was just to kind of get a jump start on the conversation with whoever that RFP goes to, just kind of as a first glance, really for the board to take a look. One of the things that we had been talking about was those resource hubs. How can we best use our budgets to get the most bang out of the little bit of bucks that we're getting from the state and things like that? So this was just really a first attempt at getting some numbers in front of the board about the individual college budgets. The last thing on there is the accreditation cycle. We talk about accreditation. I don't know that every member of the board has a great grasp about when accreditation happens, what the cycle for accreditation is. It did just so happen to come up in that conversation about the money appearing in a particular budget at a particular time, and it did coincide with an accreditation visit. So that is why this schedule is in this presentation as well. So that is all of our items that we have on the agenda for this evening. I would ask, now that we have been through the presentations, we've heard the reports, we have the information to now go back to present to the full board. What recommendations do we as a group or as a committee want to take to the full board during the September meeting? Or do you want information to the board to just be on the progress of this committee and the things we have discussed with no further recommendations at this time? Regent Whitten.
Okay, I want to be the person who says this, right? But we've had an awful lot of conversations surrounding dual credit. So do we feel that needs to kind of be a centralized focus moving forward with this group? I mean, kind of looking at how, as I think it was Dr. Reese said earlier, how the best practices or maybe it was Dr. Figueroa, I can't remember which one, with the best practices maybe it was Dr. Figueroa, that the president's leadership team perhaps has that conversation. Or that maybe we could recommend that conversation, they're given time to have that conversation perhaps, and then we move forward with that.
I think that's a great idea, but here's what I would share with you. My thoughts on this is we have really given a lot of people a lot of stuff to do and think about already. And I do not have any doubt that President Zarapata is going to move forward with all of these conversations and have these conversations again, particularly around dual credit. I loved the comment about drilling down and then punching up. I do think that there is a great opportunity for education to our legislators on dual credit. And so, and I know with Hannah working with governmental services now, as well as part of her role, I have no doubt that she'll be able to present that information in a way that they can really understand. But I think for this next board meeting, what we really need to do is just support the work that's being done, honor the work that's being done, and point out to the board how much work is being done while we are waiting for that optimization RFP to come through, because that is going to take a tremendous amount of resources, a lot of time, effort, and energy, as well as money to get that job done. And I don't really want to put more on anybody's plate than we absolutely have to right now. I think we're still, with the other things already in process and in progress, and progress being made toward the online learning, for example. The 3 initiatives we heard about today are going to come back around at the December meeting. I think we need to give some breathing room, unless I'm just way off base there. And if I am, Dr. Zarapata or Regent Winton, you can tell me. But I think there's tremendous work being done. I think the focus is we're really getting sharp with the focus, which I really appreciate. So I'm okay with making our report to the board this time informational and not adding any more to anyone's plate at this point. And like I said, I have no doubt this is going to move forward. Are you okay with that, Dr. Zarapata?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I would agree that once the optimization work starts up, there's going to be a whole lot of people buried with stuff. I think, we can give an update at the September meeting, and hopefully we can have whomever the contract is awarded to maybe say some words about it. So,
yeah, I do want to kind of point out, I've been asked a couple of times by a couple of different people in different ways about the cost of the optimization project. And I want to change the language around that a little bit. It's not going to be free, but we really believe this to be a worthwhile investment. It's going to give us a return on investment. That is one of my huge questions for the presenters when they come back. How quickly will we see a return on our investment? What do you expect our return on investment to be for anything that, any outcomes that they come back recommending? The other thing is I want to make sure that as a board going forward, that we are able to help formulate policy to support the initiatives that they come back with. It's really not our role to get into the weeds with the day-to-day and the operations and all that. I want to make sure in these presentations that we're given some guidance on how we can best write policy to support the great work that these presidents are doing, and that Dr. Zarapata is doing, and that the Chancellor's Office is doing. I want to make sure that we're able to back up and really be the visionaries for the system that we're supposed to be, as well as being the fiduciaries for the system that we're supposed to be. And I do believe that, there's been a lot of talk about what's it going to cost us to get this done. And I think the conversation needs to be more of what is this going to save us once we have gotten this completed. So I wanted to add that here at the end so that everybody who signed on could hear it. Again, in full transparency, it's not going to be free, but hopefully it's going to save us a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and help us to further focus our efforts going forward, because really good things are happening in KCTCS right now. And I really want to shout it from the rooftops. I think people need to know it. They're going to help us get our message out and make it much more focused, much more clear, and help us to get those students who need us the most in our doors. So
I would concur. If we're not going to get a return on either of these relatively large RFPs, we should never do them. I think many times instead of thinking strategically, we're thinking tactical. This is going to cost us right now, right? What's going to happen. So, look at the comp study. The comp study is going to allow us to retain employees. It's going to improve morale. It's going to improve satisfaction. That's the type of things, investments you need to make. So, yeah,
We
I think
definitely have to take care of our people. They are the core of, we're here for the students, but our people are what make us. And we've got to take care of them. So I'm so thrilled to have Lynn here, and thank you again for joining us today. Welcome back anytime, even if you don't have a specific report to present. We're happy to have any of the cabinet and any of the presidents and anyone else join us that's interested. So, all right. Thank you all so much. We got a little bit of a late start, but we are only 12 minutes past our allotted time. So thank you all so much. I appreciate everything that you're doing. Dr. Zarapata, kudos for a job well done. Keep up the good work. Thank you all. And if anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns, please shoot those to me in an email, call me, text me, whatever you need to do. So Chancellor Williams, thank you. And Alicia, once again, for all the wonderful data. It's the best way for us to make informed decisions, and we really appreciate the effort. So
thank you, Regent Fletcher.
I would entertain a motion for adjournment, Regent Whitten.
Yeah, it's on me. So moved.
and I would agree, and
it's unanimous.
We'll do that by consensus. That's right.
All right.
Hannah,
Thank you all very much.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.